That night, the house was so still I could hear the hum of the shower upstairs, his voice faintly humming a tune behind the door. I busied myself tidying the living room, folding blankets, stacking books, trying to fill the silence with little motions. For a moment, it felt ordinary, like countless evenings before. Then my eyes landed on his backpack, tossed carelessly across the couch. It looked bulkier than it had this morning, sagging like it was hiding something. Something in me stirred, not suspicion exactly, but a curiosity I couldn't shake. I bent down, my fingers brushing the worn strap, feeling the unexpected heaviness. He was always so neat, so precise, yet tonight his bag felt wrong, as if it carried more than just papers and his laptop. My chest tightened as I slowly unzipped it, telling myself I shouldn't, telling myself I trusted him. But my hands moved anyway, steady despite the storm that was beginning to rise inside me. That's when I saw it, a boutique bag tucked carefully beneath his things, satin ribbon handles peeking out like a sly smile. My breath caught. With trembling fingers, I pulled it open, the tissue paper rustling too loud in the quiet room. There it was, lingerie, delicate, elegant, shimmering in a shade of red I'd never wear. The tag still dangled, fresh and mocking. And the size, smaller, far smaller than mine. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My stomach twisted, heavy and hollow at the same time, while my mind raced through excuses he might give. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But no, men don't accidentally buy lingerie in sizes too small for their wives. My fingers curled around the fabric, soft as a secret, and for a moment I thought I might scream. Instead, I slipped it back into the bag, closing it gently as if hiding my own heartbreak. My hands trembled, but my face stayed calm. Years together had taught me how to mask emotions, how to smile even when something inside me cracked. I sat back on the couch, staring at that backpack, hearing the water upstairs still running, still humming. The absurdity of it made my lips curl into a bitter smile. There he was, singing like a man with nothing to hide, while I sat there with evidence of his betrayal burning in my lap. I pressed my palms together, forcing my breathing to steady. Anger was rising, yes, but stronger still was something colder, something sharper. I knew right then that if I let rage take over, he'd see my pain, and I wasn't ready to hand that power to him. Not yet. So I tucked the secret away, placed the bag exactly where I found it, and leaned back into the cushions. I whispered to myself, almost inaudible, this wasn't meant for me. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the water shut off upstairs, and it was like time itself slowed. Every sound, the creak of the pipes, the faint drip from the faucet, felt louder than my own heartbeat. I straightened the cushions, smoothed the blanket, desperate to erase any trace of what I'd just uncovered. By the time his footsteps echoed down the hallway, I'd arranged my face into something warm, something harmless. I would not let him see the storm waiting behind my eyes. When he came down, towel draped casually around his shoulders, he smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like our life was still intact. I smiled back, my lips moving without my heart. I asked about his day, nodded in the right places, even laughed when he made a joke. Inside, though, every word was weighed, every glance catalogued, every tiny detail feeding the new awareness pulsing through me. He thought he was safe. He thought I was blind. But that night, I made a quiet vow. I would not confront him yet. I would not beg, or cry, or demand answers that would only twist the knife deeper. No, my silence would be my armor, and my patience my weapon. I kissed him goodnight like I always did, and as he drifted off beside me, I lay awake with eyes wide open. My mind whispered a promise he couldn't hear. If he wanted to play games, I'd make sure I chose the ending. The morning after felt like any other. He kissed my cheek, grabbed that same backpack, and told me he had an early meeting. I nodded, sipping my coffee, pretending my chest wasn't still aching. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, but it felt cold on my skin. I watched him leave, every movement of his so familiar yet suddenly foreign. The door clicked shut, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I stood there, staring at my half-empty mug, the steam curling into the air like questions I couldn't answer. Was I overreacting? Was there a reasonable explanation for that bag, that delicate slip of crimson lace? But then I remembered the tag, the size, the way he'd never once thought to buy me something like that in all these years. That was the part that stung the most. It wasn't just betrayal, it was preference. A choice he'd already made. From that moment, something in me shifted. I wasn't going to be the naive wife who looked away, nor the shattered woman begging for scraps of love. No, I would watch. I would listen. I would wait. And while he thought he was weaving his little web of lies, I was already beginning to spin one of my own, silk threads of silence, patience, and a plan forming in the shadows of my mind. The excuses started piling up faster than I could keep track. "I'll be late, honey. The client wants to go over numbers again." Or, "I'm hitting the gym after work. Don't wait up." His phone became his most precious possession, always face down on the table, always on silent. He carried it from room to room like it was made of glass, never more than an arm's length away. I used to find it endearing, how connected he was. Now it looked like chains, binding him to someone else. I began to pay attention to the details he thought I wouldn't notice. The faint scent of perfume clinging to his shirt when he hugged me, one I didn't own. The smile that lingered too long when he read a text. The way his eyes lit up for someone who clearly wasn't me anymore. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was clarity. A cold, cutting kind that settled in my bones and sharpened my every sense. Late one night, when he claimed another work dinner had dragged on, I sat at the dining table with his credit card bill spread before me. There it was, a boutique lingerie store I'd never set foot in, charges from upscale restaurants we'd never visited together. My lips pressed into a thin line, but my hands stayed steady. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't losing control. I was documenting, collecting, preparing. And oh, he had no idea just how closely I was watching. The next day, I decided to stop wondering and start confirming. My heart thudded in my chest as I walked into that little boutique, the bell over the door chiming cheerfully, a cruel contrast to the weight in my stomach. The walls were lined with silk and lace, each piece more delicate than the last. A young clerk looked up and smiled, asking if I needed help. I held my breath for a second, then lifted the bag I'd found. Her eyes lit up with recognition almost immediately. "Oh, yes, I remember him," she said, her voice warm, innocent. "He was so excited when he picked this out, said it had to be perfect." Perfect. That word hit me harder than the sight of the tag. Perfect. For who? Certainly not for me. I felt a strange calm wash over me, like I had slipped into a different version of myself, one who could stand there, smiling politely, even as her heart cracked like glass. I thanked her, acting as though nothing was amiss, and walked out of the shop with my head high. The evening breeze hit my face, and for the first time I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman with a secret, one that gave me power. Betrayal may have carved its mark deep into me, but it also gave me something else: resolve. And with that resolve, a plan began to form, one that would unfold at my table, under the soft glow of candlelight, with him as the guest of honor. I didn't confront him that night, or the one after. Instead, I slipped into a role I'd perfected over the years, the devoted wife who smiles at all the right moments, who laughs at his recycled stories, who cooks his favorite meals just the way he likes them. Every movement I made was deliberate, calculated, designed to keep suspicion from ever crossing his mind. To him, life seemed normal. To me, it was a stage. I started planning quietly, like a woman sewing an intricate pattern only she can see. While he thought I was scrolling through recipes, I was studying our bank statements. While he texted with his phone tilted away, I was memorizing the times and dates, piecing together the puzzle he thought I couldn't solve. Each new discovery wasn't a dagger anymore. It was another stitch in the tapestry of my revenge. At the same time, I began weaving something else, a performance. I pulled out the good china, the crystal glasses we'd barely used since our wedding day. I went to the market, choosing wine with care, handpicking the freshest vegetables, the richest cuts of meat. If he wanted romance, I would give it to him. Only I would be the one setting the rules. And as I smoothed the tablecloth, a single thought lingered in my mind, pushing me toward the next move I knew I had to make. In the evenings, while he sat glued to his phone, I slipped away to our bedroom under the pretense of folding laundry. That's when I pulled the boutique bag from under the bed, laying the red silk across the quilt. It shimmered under the lamp, fragile and bold all at once, mocking me with its perfection. I ran my fingertips over the fabric, imagining how he pictured it on her, and then I smiled to myself. If he thought he'd see her in it, he was sorely mistaken. Every detail mattered now. I practiced in the mirror, softening my voice, curving my lips into the smile he once loved, hiding the bitterness that wanted to claw its way out. I reminded myself, this wasn't about rage, not anymore. This was about control, about showing him I'd never be the fool he assumed. My heart might ache, but my mind? My mind was already steps ahead of him, so I planned the dinner. A candlelit evening, just him and me, no friends, no excuses. I sent him a sweet little message. Let's have a night together, just us. I'll make your favorite. He replied with a heart emoji, as if I were still the woman he cherished. I almost laughed out loud. Perfect. I would serve him the meal he loved most, pour him wine until his guard softened, and then... well, he'd finally get what he thought he wanted, only not in the way he expected. The night of the dinner, I moved through the house like a hostess preparing for honored company. Candles stood ready in silver holders, their wicks waiting for the strike of a match. A vase of fresh flowers graced the center of the table, their scent mingling with the slow roast simmering in the oven. Every detail was polished, every corner staged, because this wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance, and he was the audience of one. Upstairs, I'd hidden my final act, the lingerie he'd bought, now hanging neatly in my closet. I kept glancing at it as I moved between the mirror and the dresser, adjusting my hair, applying perfume he once said drove him crazy. My reflection didn't show a broken wife. It showed a woman in command, a woman who was about to turn betrayal into theater. I whispered to myself, steadying my breath. He'll see it tonight, but not the way he imagined. By the time the door opened and I heard his footsteps, everything was in place. I greeted him with a smile, kissed his cheek, and guided him to the table, my hand warm against his back. His eyes sparkled at the sight of the candles, the wine, the feast waiting just for him. He thought he'd won, thought he was adored, thought this was love. And I, sitting across from him, poured his glass and smiled, already savoring the moment when his illusion would shatter. The atmosphere I created could have fooled anyone. The glow of the candles softened the room, wrapping us in warmth that almost felt genuine. He leaned back in his chair, his smile wide, his laughter easy, like a man basking in the glow of a wife still devoted. I nodded, I laughed at his jokes, I even brushed his hand as if I couldn't get enough of him. But every touch was a string, pulling him deeper into the web I'd spun. The wine worked quickly, loosening his shoulders, making his words tumble out with careless ease. He told me about work, about his day, about the pressures that kept him so busy. I sat there, sipping slowly, watching him talk as if nothing in our world had shifted. His arrogance was almost blinding. He believed every lie he'd told me had sunk in, that I was too soft, too trusting to see through him. That blindness would be his undoing. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how many nights he'd smiled like this for her. How many dinners had he given away what should have been mine? But instead of anger, I felt a strange calm. I was in control now, and he didn't even realize it. Each bite he took, each sip of wine, drew us closer to the moment I'd been waiting for. And when I excused myself from the table, he thought it was just the next act in my little charade of romance. I climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately, letting him hear the faint click of my heels against the wood. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out the lingerie, the red silk almost glowing in the low light. For a moment, I held it up against my body, studying the reflection staring back at me. It wasn't pain I saw anymore. It was resolve. I slipped into it piece by piece, fastening the straps with steady hands as though suiting up for battle. My heart pounded, but not from nerves, from anticipation. I sprayed the perfume he once called irresistible, the scent wrapping around me like armor. One last look in the mirror, and I almost laughed at the irony. Here I was, wearing what he'd bought for another woman, turning his fantasy into his downfall. I whispered to myself, just loud enough to hear it. Now let's see how perfect it feels when it's not her. When I stepped back into the hallway, I flicked off the bedroom light and let the shadows follow me down the stairs. His voice called out, playful, curious, half drunk on wine and self-assurance. I paused at the doorway of the dining room, letting him wait, letting suspense build. Then I appeared, leaning against the frame, draped in the lingerie, a smile tugging at my lips. His eyes widened instantly, and for the first time that night, I saw the mask of his confidence slip. For a fleeting second, he looked exactly how I once dreamed he'd look, stunned, breathless, like I was the only woman in the world. But then his eyes narrowed, darting to the tag that still dangled from the strap on my shoulder. His smile faltered. He knew, and I knew that he knew. The silence between us grew thick, the candle flames flickering as if they too were holding their breath. I tilted my head, letting the silk slip against my skin, and whispered, "Beautiful, isn't it?" My voice was calm, almost playful, but my chest ached with the weight of every secret text, every late-night excuse. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like he was choking on the lies he'd been feeding me. "It's just," he started, but the words crumbled in his throat, unfinished, like the promises he'd made. I stepped closer, the heels clicking softly on the hardwood, and let my smile linger, sharp, knowing, merciless. "Shame it wasn't meant for me," I added, my voice barely above a breath. His face drained of color, his hands frozen on the stem of his glass. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking under his gaze. He was. And as I turned away, leaving him in that heavy silence, the true beginning of my revenge had only just taken root. I let the silence stretch until it felt unbearable, the kind that makes walls groan and clocks tick louder. He kept opening his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came out. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, scrambling for excuses, for a lifeline. I poured myself another glass of wine and took a slow sip, savoring the taste as if it were victory itself. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to fill the silence for him. Inside, a storm of emotions fought for space: hurt, anger, betrayal, but above it all was a strange, steady calm. I wasn't the sobbing wife he might have expected. No, I was deliberate, unshaken, even graceful. Every inch of me was telling him the truth he'd been too cowardly to admit, that I knew, and I was no longer the woman he thought would never leave. And that terrified him more than if I had screamed. Finally, I set the glass down and leaned across the table. My eyes locked onto his, unblinking, holding him captive in his own shame. "Don't bother," I said softly, silencing whatever excuse he was about to throw at me. "You don't need to explain. I've already taken care of everything." His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. He didn't know it yet, but the trap I'd been weaving was about to tighten around him. He blinked at me, his fork halfway to his mouth, as if the room had suddenly tilted. "What do you mean, everything?" he asked, his voice cracking at the edges. I kept my gaze steady, my smile faint but sharp. My hands didn't shake anymore. They rested calmly on the table, folded like I was hosting any ordinary dinner. I almost pitied him in that moment, but pity was wasted on someone who had gambled my love away for a secret thrill. "I mean," I said, letting the words roll off my tongue slowly, "that I already know, about her, about the lingerie, about the dinners you couldn't quite explain." His face fell, the blood draining as if I had pulled the very air out of the room. He started to protest, but I lifted a finger, silencing him. "Don't," I warned. "Don't insult me further with lies. I've seen enough." And for the first time, he sat there, utterly powerless. Inside, I felt a flicker of triumph. This was what control felt like. Not shouting, not begging, but knowing the truth and refusing to crumble under it. I had spent weeks pretending, smiling, cooking, listening to his lies, all for this moment. My plan was simple, yet it cut deeper than any accusation ever could. He thought I would fall apart. But he was about to learn what happens when a woman like me chooses to rise instead. And the best part? He had no idea just how far I was willing to go. I reached for the envelope tucked neatly beside my chair and slid it across the table. His hand hovered above it, hesitant, as if he already knew the weight of what was inside. "Go on," I urged, my tone calm, almost tender, the way one might coax a child. He tore it open, and I watched his eyes dart across the neatly printed pages, legal documents, bank transfers, everything signed and sealed. My escape had been in motion long before tonight. He looked up, panic flickering in his pupils, his lips trembling with questions he couldn't form. I leaned in close enough for him to smell the perfume he'd once begged me to wear. "I've spoken to the lawyers. The accounts are secured, the house is mine, and well, you're free now." The word free slid between us like poison dressed as honey. He wanted freedom, and I was giving it to him, but not on his terms. Before he could reach for me, I stood tall, my heels clicking against the wood floor with every step. I didn't slam the door or shout. I didn't need to. Quietly, deliberately, I leaned down, close enough for him to feel my breath. "Next time you buy a gift," I whispered, "make sure it fits the woman you're actually with." I left him there, his face pale, his mouth open, surrounded by candlelight and the mocking scent of the perfume he once loved. And as I walked out into the night, I knew this was only the beginning of what he'd lose.